Hey guys, Messiah here, and welcome back to the Cornerstone Hardcore Minecraft Let's Play series. Alright, cool. We're in the Nether, and I built this little situation right here. You see my situation? It's really situated. Can't you tell? Situations. Alright, and I have this little extra situation because then I could do this. Look at that bad boy. Pop on the hair like so. He's like freaking out, like, you looking at me? You looking at me? But then he can't touch this. And I could smack him with my sword like so, a million times, and then eventually he finally will die like so. Sometimes they drop ender pearls, sometimes they don't. That's okay. So that one over there. So endermen only get angry if you look at them. Oh my gosh, I didn't even see that one. And also if you hit them. But yeah, they don't like eye contact. They're autistic. So what you do is you look at them, they come run at you, but they are like 3 blocks tall or something like that. So as long as where you are at is, you know, only 2 blocks tall, then they can't come get you and you're chilling. And they actually are allowed. So let's see. I want to turn down hostile mobs, I think. Let's bring them down 30%. I still want to hear, like, if they're around me. We're going to turn down ambient environment. Let's see. 50% UI. I think that's it. Yeah, the clicking that you hear. We don't need that to be, like, insanely loud. Everything else is good. Today, well, you guys could see. Oh, my gosh. Uh-oh. You see that? That guy, like, oh, that's the one I looked at before. He was like waiting for me, huh? Don't worry, buddy. I got what you want. Alright, there you go. But yeah, we dug out like all of these trees, and these leaves do not decay. So if you break a tree, they won't go away. You have to use a hoe, and you have to like take it out. So I've been doing that. It's taken me like forever. But if you look here, you could see all the stuff that we got from just trying to clear that area. It's a lot. But what I want to do today is I want to build a Christmas tree. That's right. We're going to build a Christmas tree. You know, I talked about us getting into the Christmas thing. Christmas is like real soon. And since we have a bunch of this, I think I'm going to use that to decorate like a large part of it. Because, you know, that's like nice for like a blue, you know, ball. Maybe, I don't know. But these ones over here, they're red. And I like red. So if I go there, problem solved? Question mark? Okay, you see these guys? They like this stuff. So if I do this, yep, they all go crazy for that. And then they should drop something on the ground. Like trade with me. Yeah. You see, I just get items. So we'll see what they give me. And they're not hostile because I have on a gold helmet. They love gold. Alright. So we took care of that. Let's see what we got. It's a fire charge. A dried gas. No idea what that is. The best course of action might actually be for me to get on top of this tree. Okay, so with this, let's head back up above and see what we could do for this Christmas tree. Alright. So it's snowing. Oh. And we have to take off our armor. So we'll put on our regular armor, which soon we'll be able to upgrade this as well to diamond armor. But for now, we're chilling. All right, so I think we have enough stuff. And in terms of setting this Christmas tree up, I feel like we have some space like right here ish. So well, let's do it here. So in the last episode, I would have talked a little bit about what Christmas kind of means to me and how it's special to me because of just experiences I've had with my family. And now I also want to like make it special as I create my own experiences for my eventual family as well. Um, and I imagine that there are people out there that they also have their own special memories, and Christmas is a beautiful time in general. However, there's like a lot of other parts of Christmas. Like when you think about Christmas, you probably think about Christmas trees, you think about gifts, cookies, milk, chimney, stockings, lights, cameras, action. But but all of these things are not essential parts of Christmas. However, Christmas in and of itself is or has become something that is like a soup. It's an amalgamation of different cultures and even languages and coming from different parts of the world, different peoples, kind of coming together, keeping some parts, changing some parts, removing, and just evolving into what we see today. So, originally, Christmas was intended to be this celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. That does not mean that Jesus was born on the 25th of December. He definitely was not. Or, well, I guess I can't say he definitely was not, but as far as we know, he probably was not. Yeah? However, this time, the 25th of December, it kind of coincided with a time of celebration for people because, during the winter, as the winter was coming on, there's not a lot of agricultural things that people could do, which before the industrial age and the industrial revolution, like a lot of industries kind of revolved around agriculture, and so they depended on the seasons. And so when you had, the winter solstice kind of come around, then, there wasn't as much work for people to do, and so people had a lot more time at home with their friends and their families, and so it was a little bit more festive. Yeah. Um, and so there are other things that people also celebrated around this time, which had to do with feasts and celebrations that, you know, coincided with the seasons, and even like pagan traditions, like celebrating the sun because of the solstice. The sun kind of appears in a specific part of the sky around this time. And so there are people that celebrated that and these sun gods and Saturnalia. And so here is where some people get into that debate of, oh, Christmas is actually a pagan celebration. Well, some people could argue that some of the origins of Christmas are tied into some of these pagan things, but historians also, they're kind of back and forth because they don't really know which one came first, right? When the Roman Empire was sort of trying to push Christianity the way that they did, what they also allowed for was for people to celebrate their own quote unquote pagan traditions as well. Because, you know, as a government, they wanted people to still, I don't know, feel like themselves and not be too angry at the government for changing everything. So wherever they deemed that these people's holidays or cultural practices weren't too contrary to what they saw as Christian, then it was like, okay, yeah, they could do that. And so already you could see how that would kind of morph the celebration of Christmas. And as history kind of continued, people either accepted or didn't quite accept Christmas. So even within the Christian space, there are Christians who opposed Christmas, and there are other Christians who, were all for it. Um, However, there were other celebrations at the time which most Christians kind of didn't have an issue with. So there's a celebration of the Epiphany, right? And the Nativity. So this is where this bright star appears in the sky. So historically, this is what happens when Jesus is born. This bright star appears and it lets the wise men know. So these were the guys who were keeping account of some of these consolations and what they meant at the time, that, oh, the Messiah is born, right? So that's the Epiphany. And that was celebrated in January, on the 6th of January. And then you have the 25th of December, which is where, you know, we know as Christmas. But between those two dates, you actually have 12 days, right? And that's sort of where this 12 days of Christmas came about. Um, it didn't come before December. It actually started on the 25th of December and went all the way to the Epiphany, which was in January. And then there's also like Advent. So some Christians also celebrate Advent, and I think it's a great thing to celebrate because it's these 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas, sort of preparing your mind and your heart to to understand what Christmas is about, you know, and focus on love and joy and hope and peace and some of these key elements that are a part of the story of Jesus Christ. But across the board, throughout, I guess, the global West, if I could refer to it as that, this Christmas season was this general time of festivities and celebration. And people did it differently in different parts of the world. And so in Germany, they actually refer to it as Yule, which we still hear those words, you know, the Yule tide. That's German. And then in some Anglo-Saxon like places, they called it Christmas, which is how we get the word Christmas. And then in other, you know, places that speak different languages, you have like Noel, Navidad, Natal, Natale, and even, well, I'm gonna butcher this, but it's like it's Dutch, but it means holy night. I Maybe somebody out there who speaks Dutch, like, no, I can't. So I'm not even gonna try. Now in America, however, Christmas was that's where it was most popular, I guess, at the time, like where it was kind of taken off, and then not so much anymore. So what happened is the English were kind of, I mean, they owned America, and so a lot of their own traditions and holidays, that's what was celebrated. The Christian world was kind of splitting up, you know, Catholics, and you have Protestants, and you have the Orthodox, and people have different customs and different opinions about Christianity. And things got like so bad that in 1647, Christmas was actually banned, like in England, like nope, no more Christmas. And then that lasted like a couple of years, I think like 2-ish, 3-ish decades. And then in like about 1660, like then Christmas was back, and it's like, all right, cool, we're gonna allow it, but it was like much more tame. And the reason why Christmas got banned is because people, I guess, coming from some of those pagan cultural practices, people actually made it a time for mischief as well. So one of these traditions people had at Christmas time was like the poor or the disimpoverished or those who just didn't have as much as others. They would go around singing or performing or even like acting out different things for people in exchange for money. This is kind of like where caroling comes from. But they would be like really persistent, right? So like it's like you have to give them something or they're not gonna leave. And sometimes they would even be like mischievous, you know, so that you want to get rid of them. So you give them something, you give them money or food or whatever it is. And that didn't stick around for too long. As a matter of fact, they tried really hard to get rid of that aspect of Christmas in terms of the mischief. Um, but it kind of came back before Halloween. Anyway, and so when Christmas was banned, it was mostly because of those sides of it. People just were not feeling it. They're not into that. And so when it came back, it was really tame. So the mischievous parts of it, they tried to do away with all of that. And so it's much more calm. Yeah. The other big change that happened around this time too is that Christmas kind of shifted from a family focus more so to children, right? So it wasn't about the whole family anymore. It was more so for children. Not that whole families can't celebrate Christmas, but the idea is like the gifts are for the kids. You know, all of the wonder and the quote unquote magic of Christmas is really for the kids. And so what kind of helped push these ideas is actually stories. So there in the US, you have that going on. You also have in Germany, you also have in Dutch places and Spanish speak, like all these different people with their own traditions, their own like myths and lores kind of feeding into what Christmas is. And so here's where we kind of land on the idea of Santa Claus. Now, originally, the idea is Santa Claus kind of comes from this character, a real man. His name is Saint Nicholas, and he was a saint, like how Catholics regard saints. He was Saint Nicholas of Myra, which was in Turkey, And he was like noble, and he was like a really good guy. Apparently, he was also pretty rich. Like he came from a well-off family, and so he was very generous. And one of the stories that is really popular about his life is that there was this father, and he had three daughters, but he himself wasn't rich, and so he couldn't afford to have a dowry for them, which at the time, like nobody would want to marry your daughters if there was no dowry, like money or land or resources of some sort that came along with marrying them, especially if you weren't coming from like a noble family, which if this guy didn't have the money for it, he probably was not. Nicholas actually gave him the money, but the way that he did it is he kind of just threw bags of money into the house at night, is how the story goes. And apparently on the third night, like the father actually like catches him doing this, but he kind of asks him to keep it all secret because Nicholas was actually aiming to become a bishop, and so all of these generous acts was actually him pursuing what would be this route to being like a really devout Christian. Now, later on, when the Reformation kind of sort of happens in the U.S., I guess mostly, then a lot of like Christians, they want to get rid of these Catholic ideas, and one of these notable guys is actually Martin Luther King, and so he wants to do away with this idea of Saint Nicholas, and one of the suggestions that comes up instead is Christ kin, which is the Christ child, right? Um, and so they're trying to push that idea instead, but it's kind of weird because there's still this idea that, you know, this Christ king is really generous and he's going to bring gifts and money for people, but it's also a baby, right? So it's like, it doesn't fit with the imagery, I guess, of the lore or the stories, or I don't know. In other parts of the world, though, you have other forms of this, like Father Christmas or even like Santa Claus, which he is more of like this bishop, and so he wears this red bishop robe and he has a long white beard. And there's this guy or these couple of guys that go with him, and they're actually slaves. Like they're African slaves, but that doesn't really go across well. And so in later versions of this, it becomes just like a servant that has soot on his face from working in the chimney as like a chimney sweep. And you also get this idea of punishment that comes along with being a bad kid. So Santa Claus will be good to you, like he'll give you sweets and candy and stuff, like if you're great. If you're not a good child, then he'll put you in a bag and take you to Spain or wherever it is. And then he'll bring you back after the holidays. It's just like a little punishment for kids. But then there's other versions of this, like Krampus, which is like he's just like this kind of goat man, evil person, and he just comes and takes you if you're a bad kid. And sometimes he just doesn't bring you back. So I mean, like there's like so much history and like so many different versions of different Christmas traditions in there. So you could kind of see how it's all like mixed up. And what we know today as the popularized version of Santa Claus is actually mostly what was projected by authors. So people who wrote stories and people who wrote poems, and they sort of developed this idea of Santa Claus being this magical, mystical figure that rides on a sleigh pulled by reindeer that could fly, and he lives in the North Pole, and he has elves and all this stuff. But Christmas has nothing to do with that, really and truly. The big picture here is this. Christmas is this celebration of Jesus Christ coming into the world. Now, we choose to do it around December, but really, you could celebrate Christmas every day. The way I understand it, Christmas is not a specific time. It's actually just an awareness of this idea of Jesus Christ came into the world. He was born as a baby in a manger, so very humble beginnings. And then we know how the story goes. Well, I know how the story goes. Some of you might not know. But he lives this perfect life, and then at the age of 33, he's actually crucified on our behalf, right? Being completely innocent of any crimes, of any sins, he's killed. And he becomes this sacrifice on our behalf and restores us into relationship with God. And that's the beauty, because Christmas is sort of a big narrative arc in this long spanning story of God's love for us. That's what Christmas is about. It's not about Santa Claus. It's not about gifts. It's not about cookies. Definitely not about snow in a chimney if you live in the tropics. It's about Jesus Christ coming into the world. Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and the conversations that we had today. And I hope you guys are, getting ready for Christmas, both, like doing whatever preparations you have to do, and, people decorating, cooking, getting gifts, all that stuff, but also like mentally and emotionally and especially spiritually, that you're getting ready for Christmas. Well, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. Or it's a better angle there. Peace.